name is Bob Moore. I started as an ensign, wound up as a lieutenant. I got involved in the Navy because my father was a chief petty officer. And used to dress up as Halloween in his uniform. I became involved in the Navy actively in college. And my draft number was very high, and I decided I needed to control my destiny. So I went to the school at New Haven College, but Yale University, which is right down the street, had an ROTC program. So I was able to join that program and start my career. ROTC program taught us about operations and seamanship and navigation. My first year, I spent a summer at Purdue University with the Marines, learning how to run. And then the second year, I was on a ship called the Spiegel Grove on Little Creek. I did my summer tour there. Spiegel Grove was a LSD, and while we were down in the Caribbean, we had a boiler incident which forced it to go into the yards and become non-operational. So we had a group of midshipmen that needed to move, and they moved us to the Francis Marion. Francis Marion was just a troop carrier that wasn't leaving the pier, and we were kind of there as a holding action. The Spiegel Grove had a boiler problem. They really needed to get all of us off, and they found a ship to put us there. We didn't really do much on the Francis Marion. I received my commission in June of 1969. Shortly thereafter, I was married and left my wife. From graduation, I went on my honeymoon, and returned from my honeymoon. I went on active duty, reported to the board of Lloyd Thomas. I got orders in April of 1969 saying I was going to Lloyd Thomas. Said I was going to replace a certain officer. And what I did with my wife and I, my fiance at that time, we called the ship and said we'd like to come visit. So we took a day, went down and visited the ship, met many of the officer crew. My wife also took the advantage of applying for a job as a teacher in Newport and was successful in getting a job there. So we spent a day down there. We looked at apartments. We looked at, getting ourselves settled in. When I got on Lloyd Thomas, it was a ship that was in reserve status, but it had just recently been taken off, and one of the first things we did was go to Guantanamo Bay for 3 months. And we did what's called refresher training, all aspects of seamanship, operations, gunnery, got us ready for deployment. While there, we had our home port transferred from Newport, Rhode Island to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, which was kind of unsettling because my wife had just got a job as a teacher. But we moved to Hawaii. I left my wife home, who was then pregnant, and I spent a year in Hawaii and Vietnam before she was able to come out with the baby. When I went to Hawaii, a group of us decided we were not going to live on the ship, so we got ourselves an apartment, and we had 6 of us living in an apartment. While there, we also made a trip to Seattle for the Seattle Seafair, and we did a lot of training at sea. We then departed for Vietnam. I had a good crew, a good group of officers. There was 5 ensigns that reported aboard at the same time. So we formed a bond with each other. The operation, the hierarchy was very good, very professional. I was the first lieutenant, which meant I was in charge of the deck force. I had about 50 seamen working for me. I was also the dash pilot, which was a remote control anti-submarine aircraft. And I was also the assistant gunnery officer, I was a legal officer, and I was a welfare and recreation officer. The deck force basically took care of all topside spaces on the main deck, took care of the sides of the ship, making sure that all aspects of that were seaworthy, clean, presentable. We were in charge of underway replenishment, we were in charge of all the different aspects of seamanship. Provided all the sailors for deck watches, and I was also the assistant gunnery officer. We had 2 5-inch mounts, twin 5-inch 38s, basically used for ground fire support and theoretically anti-aircraft. But we were outclassed by the newer systems. The ship was an older ship. I was also the dash pilot, which was a remote control anti-submarine aircraft. Nothing more than a 55-gallon drum of JP-5 aviation fuel with 2 opposing rotors, and we had flight capability. Obviously, it had some crash capability, but basically carried a torpedo used for anti-submarine warfare. It was also used for, you could mount a camera to it and use it for surveillance. You flew it from the deck, then you transferred control to the combat section, and they flew it and then transferred it back to the deck, which we were responsible for takeoff and landing. It was sometimes very difficult because the ship was obviously moving pitch, yaw, and you had to develop a feel for where it is, get it done. I was a legal officer. Well, there was always problems. Back then, there was a draft. Today's Navy is all volunteer, a lot more professional. We had a draft where a lot of the sailors were there because the judge said, you have a choice. So it was herding cats at sometimes. But you tried to give them everything you could. But there were guys that were still problem people. And there were guys that we took out of the service because they were problem people. It was not easy, but you tried to get through them. You appealed to their pride. There were some people just weren't going to be there. And you could see right away that was going to be a problem. It's only a 350-foot destroyer, 290 men, living, eating, working together. It's important that you get along. Well, interestingly enough, we transferred from the East Coast to the West Coast in 3 ships. Went to high school with a fellow officer on another ship, and my wife and his wife were sorority sisters in high school, so it made it very easy when we got over to Hawaii that we knew people in the same circumstances. It was rather boring. It was a 7-day transit, and basically ran some drills and made sure we arrived clean and safe. I started out in what's called forward opposite country, which was up in the bow of the ship. In heavy weather, it could get rather turbulent. And as openings became available, we moved back to what's called after officers' quarters, typically a 3-man stateroom office, a lot more comfortable situation. And there was a whole area called after officers' quarters, which housed probably about 10 to 15 officers. The food was excellent. Okay, and the reason being that the gentleman that's sponsoring this here was our mess caterer, and that's a collateral job. And he was very well connected, and we ate well. And we had stewards that took care of us, cooking and cleaning, things like that. So we did well. It was not unusual to have steak dinners, chicken Kiev, baked Alaska for dessert. We gave the stewards a lot of latitude to be creative. Christmas was always a day off. Sundays were always a day off. We would, special hours where you could sleep in. I spent my birthday in Guantanamo Bay. I spent another birthday in Okinawa, and I spent another birthday on the gun line in Vietnam. So those are the special holidays which I remember because I was never home. Well, we tried to make it as festive as possible. We had cookouts, get everybody together, church services. And basically everybody relaxed. It was very, we were out at sea under some very trying circumstances, and it was time to relax. We had several roles. One of our first roles was gunfire support down in the lower region. I don't remember the targets. We had a spotter, some guy in a plane, and we direct our fire. We always, like all the statistics reporting, we killed lots of Vietnamese. Whether we did or not, who knows, but that was what the government was reporting at that time. We would try to put rounds inside a cave. Our firing mechanisms were very accurate. So the spotter would be up there, he would adjust our fire. And we were always at anchor, so we always had a stable base. We would hit specific targets during the day, where we would have a spotter in a plane. At night, we would do what's called H&I fire, harassment and interdiction, where we would do at random intervals, just lob bombs, into rice paddies. roads and things like that. As the Vietnamese came down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, we tried to disrupt that. And that's the H&I fire at night, maybe a mile. And we would sit there and anchor. Then we would also have plane guard duty. Plane guard is you get yourself behind an aircraft carrier, probably a distance of 1,000 to 2,000 yards, and you trail it as it's doing takeoff and landing operations. If a pilot goes in, our job was to rescue it. Fortunately, that did not happen. Impressive, very impressive. The guys knew what they were doing. I'm glad it wasn't me. We were with the Oriskany, the Enterprise, and the Midway. The only thing we would do is we would, do vertical replenishment. Helicopters would come out, we'd refuel them. They'd also drop off the mail and whatever supplies. We would go alongside tankers, oilers, carriers for replenishment, supplies, ammunition, and fuel. We have our own September 11th. I was in what's called IC plot, controlling the computer to control the guns. I gave the order to fire. Came down from the bridge, I relayed it. We relayed it to the gun mount, and we're sitting there, and all of a sudden we heard this explosion right after the trigger was pulled. Word came down that the gun mount, the barrel of the gun mount blew off the ship, and there were 14 men inside that mount. 3 did not make it. And there were several others that, although they made it, one I know of died months later of a heart attack, and the rest of them had memories. It was a premature round where the fuse went off 6 inches into the breech. If we took a hit or what happened after a few minutes, then it started to get some clarity. We started thinking about the people in there. Now where we were, there was no escape for us if something went wrong. We were kind of in an isolated section of the ship. First of all, to extract the people from the gun mount. The wardroom turned into be a triage center. All the 3 sailors were brought in there, prepped for transportation, get them ready. Get them ready. Helicopter came out and brought them ashore. Then another helicopter came out and took the wounded and treated them on shore. The mood of the crew was not very good, as you can imagine. But we had a rally round and we had to continue another mission. Repair efforts was getting the people out. The repair efforts were really, there's nothing you can do with the gun mount itself. It was inoperable and it shifted off its pinions. So we were down to 1 mount. We went back to Subic Bay after a few days. Took the gun mount off and put a plate over it. So we had a flat deck. And they had a search for a gun mount for us, and they found one in Yokosuka, Japan. We went up to Japan, had a new gun mount done. We worked with the CIA. We worked with the Australian Marines who ran amphibious landings. Yes, Cameron Bay. And we went up the Saigon River, but never docked there. Basically, we did landing parties with them. We would take them ashore, helicopter would bring them back up. They pretty much kept themselves. A few relationships were built, and a couple of guys that have working relationships with them are here now. The CIA did some things that we didn't know what they were doing, we just supported them. And we were part of the raid on the Hanoi Hilton. I think it was called Sante, where we provided gun support, diversionary support. There were some special maneuvers that we did in terms of gunfire control, but basically it was more of a diversion tactic, and we did a lot of gunfire. We went up the river with the CIA. The reason I remember the river is because that was a day that qualified us as a brown water Navy ship, being inland. Brown water Navy means it was contaminated water from Agent Orange. We cooked with that water, we ate that water, we drank that water because we made our own water. And I had the honor of contacting Agent Orange. I know it was a dark night. You could practically touch the trees on the side of the river. It was a scary time. I served deck watches. I was the officer of the deck, so I would serve deck watches. I would make sure that the ship remained clean, functioning. I was also a gunfire control officer, where I'd be stationed in what's called IC plot, where we would control the computers that control the guns. Lee Brown was our captain. Our first captain was DJ Anthony. Met with some unfortunate circumstances which aren't worth going into. He was relieved by Lee Brown. Lee Brown was our captain throughout Vietnam. He was a Mustang. He was a very good captain, had a lot of patience with the younger officers learning. He was a very good teacher. And our first XO was called Mert Person, and then he was replaced by Commander Schultz. They were all good people. Treated them right, they treated me right. Did your job. It was important. We were a very close group. We went on the beach together when we had a chance. The families back home were together. So a lot of, the married officers, their wives banded together and formed a support group themselves. We ran into a lot of Soviet fishing fleet. We were able to buy Alaskan king crab for $15 a pound. And I brought king crab home for the wife, and she ate crab salad for 6 months. We also did an Alaskan cruise where there was a nuclear blast in Antarctic Island, and our job was to keep traffic away while that thing was going on, and if any radiation escaped, we were to track it in the winter. It's pretty heavy seas. It was an underground test. It was a mile underground. I remember Alaska, we went into Antarctic Island. As we ran guard, the seas were 40-foot seas, 80-mile-an-hour winds. It was quite an event. Right? We would travel one direction, do about a mile an hour, turn around and surf all the way back. So we did that for 3 months. We were not allowed to import except to refuel and rearm because of some discipline issues. And it really tested you from a seamanship standpoint, controlling the ship. At that point in time, we took, the ship was designed for a 55-degree roll, we took a 53-degree roll. And you stand there, it seems like an eternity, and hoping it comes back, and eventually it did. It was a challenging time to be on a ship. Well, we came back from the Pacific, then we went up to Antarctica for the nuclear blast. Seattle Seafair, and basically in and around Hawaiian operations. Well, I knew about 2 weeks ahead of time I was leaving. I had a replacement to train, so I spent a lot of time showing him what we did and how we did it, and put his own fingerprints on the job, and I said goodbye. Back home, I had a wife and a baby. Had no job, spent 2-3 months looking for a job, finally got a job at a defense contractor, had another baby, and my career started. I worked my way up as an engineer into management, eventually becoming a VP of operations and general manager. Working internationally, I did many turnarounds on companies in Europe and in Asia. And got to retire at 53. Lloyd Thomas was another ship of many ships with dedicated professionals who did their job. The ship was probably started in the late 40s. It was a DDE and what's called a FRAM conversion, where they added a flight deck, some weapon systems. Traveled exclusively on the East Coast. Did a world tour, I'm sure. But most of the time it was in North Atlantic.